The wedding hall glowed with golden light. Chandeliers sparkled like tiny stars, and white roses filled the air with a soft fragrance. Guests sat in their chairs, whispering and smiling, their eyes fixed on the front where the bride would soon arrive. Cameras flashed, music played gently, and the hall was alive with excitement. Everyone was waiting for the moment. Vanessa, the bride, stood at the altar, her white gown shining under the lights. She held her bouquet tightly, her lips curved into a perfect smile. This was her day, the day she wanted to show the world her success, her beauty, and her victory. But then, the heavy doors of the hall slowly opened. The crowd turned their heads. And there he was, Daniel. The tall figure of the millionaire stepped into the room, dressed in a black tailored tuxedo. His presence was powerful, his steps calm, but his eyes held something cold and unreadable. He was the man everyone in the city knew, rich, charming, admired, and envied. He was also Vanessa's ex-fiancé, the man she had once been engaged to, before everything fell apart. But he was not alone. Beside him walked a woman. She was dressed in a simple but elegant evening gown, not as expensive as the others, but beautiful in its quiet grace. Her hair was neatly styled, her face soft yet nervous. She walked carefully, holding her hands together, but her eyes revealed a life of hardship. They carried the weight of pain, of nights under the open sky, of battles fought in silence. Gasps ran through the hall. Guests leaned closer to each other, whispering words that cut through the silence like knives. "Isn't she homeless?" one woman murmured. "Yes. I've seen her on the streets," another replied, her voice low but sharp. The whispers grew louder, spreading like fire through the crowd. Laughter mixed with shock. Some stared in disbelief, others shook their heads. Cameras turned from the bride to this strange woman who dared to walk into a millionaire's world. At the altar, Vanessa's smile froze. Her lips trembled. The flowers in her hands felt heavy, almost slipping. Her eyes narrowed, fixed on the woman walking beside Daniel. Her heart pounded with anger. This was not part of her plan. Why had he come? And why with her? Daniel's face remained calm. He walked with confidence, as though the whispers and the judging eyes did not exist. His hand stayed close to Grace, steadying her when she slowed her steps. He did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at the crowd. His gaze was only forward, straight and strong. Grace, on the other hand, felt every stare piercing through her skin. Her hands shook slightly, but she lifted her chin. She did not want to bow her head. She walked with dignity, even though her heart raced. She could hear their voices, the laughter, the cruel words hidden in soft whispers. But she kept moving. She remembered the nights she had slept under cold bridges, the mornings when strangers refused to meet her eyes. She remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the shame. Yet here she was now, walking into a hall of gold and silk, where every eye was on her. At that moment, she knew this was not just about Daniel. This was about her. The tension in the room grew heavy. Guests exchanged looks, trying to understand. Why would Daniel, one of the wealthiest men in the city, bring a homeless woman to this wedding? What game was he playing? Was it revenge, humiliation, or something else entirely? Vanessa's lips finally parted, but no words came. Her perfect day was already breaking apart. She had dreamed of this wedding being the talk of the town, but not like this. This was shame. This was insult. Daniel and Grace reached their seats. The music had stopped without anyone noticing. Even the cameras hesitated, unsure where to point. The air felt frozen, filled with questions but no answers. Grace lowered herself into the chair Daniel pulled for her. She sat with her back straight, eyes fixed on the floor for a moment before she lifted them again. There was no fear now, only quiet strength. Daniel leaned slightly toward her. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You're doing fine," he said. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Across the hall, Vanessa tightened her grip on her bouquet until the flowers bent. She forced her smile back, but it looked more like a mask now, brittle and fragile. Inside, her anger boiled. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the eyes of her guests held her still. She could not lose control. Not yet. The whispers did not stop. Why would he bring her here? Is this his new girlfriend? Impossible. Look at her, she's nothing. Or maybe she's more than we think. Every word reached Grace's ears, but she did not react. Her gaze remained steady, though her heart burned. She knew what they saw when they looked at her, a woman from the streets, out of place, unworthy. But she also knew something they did not. She had a story. And tonight, that story would be heard. Daniel sat beside her, his expression unreadable. To the world, he was calm, cold, untouchable. But inside, a storm moved quietly. He had brought her here for a reason. He had brought her to the very place where his past and his present collided. And this was only the beginning. The hall, filled with gold and flowers, had become a stage. A stage for secrets, for revelations, for a truth that none of them were ready to face. Everyone waited. Everyone wondered. What would happen next? The music had stopped, but no one noticed when it happened. The golden hall, once filled with laughter and soft violin notes, was now alive with whispers. Guests leaned toward each other, their voices low but sharp, their eyes darting back and forth between the bride at the altar and the strange woman sitting beside Daniel. Grace felt those eyes on her like 100 knives. Every smile she caught was false, every whisper carried poison. She sat still, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, but her chest rose and fell quickly with nervous breaths. At the altar, Vanessa forced her smile to stay. Her teeth pressed together as she looked over the crowd. She could feel it, the attention slipping away from her, sliding toward Daniel and the woman he had brought. This was supposed to be her night, her perfect show of power, of beauty, of triumph. But now it felt like someone had stolen the spotlight and placed it on a woman she considered beneath her. She held her bouquet tighter, petals breaking under the pressure of her fingers. Inside, her anger boiled. But she kept it hidden, her face glowing with the mask of a bride. She told herself she would not break, not in front of these people. At the tables, the guests' whispers grew louder. "Who is she?" one man muttered, his eyes wide. "I've seen her before," a woman whispered. "On the street near the station. Yes, begging for food." Impossible. Daniel would never. He could have anyone. Maybe this is some kind of joke. Maybe he wants to embarrass Vanessa. Or maybe, another voice said softly, maybe she is important to him. The guesses spread like fire. Some laughed at the thought. Others frowned in confusion. A few stared with quiet curiosity, sensing there was more than met the eye. Daniel remained silent. He sat tall, calm, unmoved by the storm of voices. His dark eyes watched the stage, but inside his mind, memories stirred. He heard their whispers, but they meant nothing to him. He knew why Grace was here, even if no one else did. Grace lowered her gaze for a moment. She wanted to disappear, to run from the stairs, the laughter, the weight of this place. She did not belong here. Her life had been on the cold streets, not among golden chandeliers. But then she remembered Daniel's voice earlier, "You're doing fine." Those words gave her strength. She lifted her chin again. If she let fear break her now, then the whispers would win. Across the hall, Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She could not take it anymore. As the ceremony paused, she stepped down from the altar. Her gown swished across the floor as she walked, every step sharp, every movement filled with anger she was trying to hide. Guests turned their heads, sensing something was about to happen. She stopped a few steps from Daniel's table. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes burned. "Daniel," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "you always had a taste for drama. But this is a new level, even for you." The whispers fell silent. Everyone leaned closer, holding their breath. Daniel looked up slowly. His face showed no surprise, no anger, just calm. "I didn't come here for drama, Vanessa." Her lips curled. "Really? Then tell me, what is this?" Her eyes slid toward Grace, scanning her from head to toe. "You walk into my wedding with her? What do you expect people to think?" Grace felt her cheeks heat. She wanted to vanish under the table. But Daniel's voice broke the silence. "I don't care what they think." His tone was firm, clear, unshakable. The crowd stirred again. Guests whispered, gasped, exchanged looks. Vanessa's smile cracked, her anger flashing openly for a moment before she smoothed it back. She leaned closer, lowering her voice though everyone could still hear. Do you want to ruin me, Daniel? Is that it? You couldn't bear to see me happy, so you brought her here? A woman who belongs on the streets. Grace flinched at the words, but she kept her head high. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. She belongs where I choose to bring her. Gasps echoed across the hall. Some guests whispered with shock. Others nodded in silence, sensing something deeper beneath his words. Vanessa's hands trembled. She wanted to shout, to tear that calm look from Daniel's face. But she couldn't, not yet. She knew the crowd was watching, their eyes hungry for scandal. She stepped back, her smile returning, though her eyes were hard as stone. Well, she said coldly, enjoy your evening. I hope she doesn't embarrass you more than she already has. She turned sharply, her gown brushing the floor like a whip. She returned to the altar, her heart pounding, her thoughts racing. This was not over. Grace watched her go, her chest tight. For the first time, she felt the weight of why Daniel had brought her. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a battlefield. And she was standing at the center of it. The whispers began again, louder than before. Questions filled the air, buzzing through the golden hall. Why did he defend her like that? Does she know him from before? She must have something on him. There's no other reason. No, there's something else. Look at the way he looked at her. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. She knew the whispers would not stop. But she also knew something they did not. This night would not end with just whispers. Secrets were waiting to break free. And when they did, no one in this hall would ever forget. The golden lights of the wedding hall flickered softly, but the atmosphere had changed. Laughter and music were gone, replaced by a tense silence that hummed like electricity. Guests stared at Daniel and Grace, whispering theories, imagining scandals, and speculating about the secret that connected them. Grace sat tall, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Every now and then, she glanced at the crowd, seeing their shock, their curiosity, their judgment. Some faces were filled with pity, some with mockery, others with hidden admiration. But she did not flinch. She knew she was out of place here, this world of wealth, gowns, and crystal chandeliers, but she had a role now, one she had not expected to play. Vanessa could not sit still. She had returned to the altar, but her mind was a storm of anger and confusion. How dared Daniel bring this woman here? She had imagined the perfect wedding for months, a moment where everyone would see her victory over the man who had left her. But now, the victory had slipped from her fingers. The tables had turned. Finally, she could not bear it any longer. She stepped down from the altar again, this time moving with a slow, deliberate grace, her gown brushing the floor like a warning. Her eyes locked on Daniel. Daniel, she said, her voice low but sharp, explain this. Why did you bring her here? Do you think this is funny? Daniel looked up at her slowly. His dark eyes were calm, steady, filled with a quiet strength. This isn't about humor, Vanessa. It's about truth. And tonight, the truth deserves to be seen. Vanessa's lips curled in disbelief. Truth? What truth could she possibly have? She's nothing compared to me. Everything I have, I earned. Everything you wanted, you left me for. And now, this. Grace felt her cheeks flush. She wanted to shrink into her seat, disappear, vanish from the golden hall filled with flashing eyes. But she also felt something surprising, a sense of calm, a quiet courage she had not felt in years. She remembered Daniel's words, whispered to her earlier, "You're doing fine." And she knew she had to face this. Vanessa took a step closer, her anger rising. Do you really think she belongs here? At my wedding? Among all of these people? Do you think anyone will believe she deserves this? Daniel's gaze never wavered. He finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. She doesn't need anyone's approval. And she deserves more than you could ever give her. The room fell silent. Guests held their breath. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Some of the women clutched their pearls, unsure of what was happening. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably, realizing that a story far bigger than a wedding was unfolding in front of them. Vanessa's hands trembled. She gripped her bouquet so tightly that petals bent and fell to the floor. "What are you talking about? How could she? What does she even mean to you?" Her voice cracked slightly, betraying her panic. Grace finally lifted her eyes. For the first time, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't mean anything to him," she said. "Not in the way you think. I'm just a part of his past. And maybe, tonight, that past needs to be remembered." The hall stirred. A few guests leaned forward, sensing that the story was deeper than simple jealousy. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her mind raced, trying to understand what Grace meant. How could someone like her, a woman from the streets, as everyone knew, have any connection to Daniel's past? Daniel stood slowly, his movements deliberate. "Grace helped me when I had nothing. She saved me in ways you can't even imagine. And tonight, I want her here not as a joke, not as a decoration, but because she deserves it." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some guests whispered in shock. Others exchanged curious glances. The wealthy, glamorous crowd had never witnessed anything like this before. Vanessa's hands shook. She could not contain herself anymore. "Saved you," she repeated, her voice rising. "How could she save you? She's homeless." Grace's eyes narrowed slightly, but she stayed silent. She did not need to speak to prove her worth. Her calm presence, the dignity in her posture, said more than words could. Daniel took a step toward Vanessa, his tone even but carrying authority. "She saved me when I was nobody. When you were gone, thinking only of yourself, she stood by me. And now, she is here. Because she earned it." Vanessa's face turned red, her anger boiling. She opened her mouth, trying to shout, to humiliate, to regain control. But Daniel did not let her interrupt. He turned slightly toward Grace, offering her a quiet nod. She rose slowly from her chair, her hands still folded in front of her, and walked to the center of the hall. The guests held their breath. Every eye was on Grace now, every whisper silenced. Even Vanessa froze. Grace's voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and strong. "I am not here to compete with anyone. I am not here to take revenge. I am here because this is where I belong. I helped Daniel once. And now, I am simply here to stand with him, to remind everyone that kindness, loyalty, and courage are not measured by wealth or status." The hall was silent. Everyone stared. Some felt guilt, some amazement, others shock. Vanessa's lips trembled. The perfect wedding she had dreamed of was crumbling before her eyes, but the woman she had tried to mock now commanded respect without a single act of aggression. Grace returned to her seat, calm and dignified, her eyes meeting Daniel's briefly. The silent communication between them was clear. The past had been remembered. The world would now see a different truth. Vanessa's face burned with frustration. She had lost control of the night, of the story, of the moment she had so carefully planned. And yet, she did not understand that this was just the beginning. The whispers began again, but this time, they were different. Guests spoke not of scandal, but of curiosity, of wonder. Something important had shifted. The world they thought they knew, the world of wealth, power, and appearances, was no longer the same. Grace had stepped into it. And she had already started to change it. The hall was silent, heavy with anticipation. Even the soft music had stopped, as if the world itself was waiting. Every guest's eyes were on Grace now, the woman who had quietly but firmly taken the attention away from the bride. Vanessa's face was pale, her perfect smile cracking under the weight of shock and anger. Grace sat still for a moment, breathing slowly. She knew the whispers had not stopped, though they were quieter now. The crowd sensed something bigger was about to unfold. She looked at Daniel, his calm eyes giving her a subtle nod, a silent signal to speak, to tell the truth no one expected. She stood up slowly, her gown brushing the floor. The guests leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity stronger than ever. Vanessa's hands clenched the bouquet tightly. She could feel her perfect wedding slipping away, but she had no idea what was coming next. Grace's voice, soft at first, carried across the hall. I want to tell everyone something," she said. Her eyes met Vanessa's briefly before she continued. I knew Daniel long before any of you did. Long before the wealth, long before the success, long before this wedding. Gasps echoed through the room. Guests exchanged astonished glances. Some whispered nervously. Others sat frozen, waiting to hear more. Vanessa's face turned even redder, disbelief and fear mixing in her eyes. Grace took a deep breath. Years ago, when Daniel had nothing, when life had left him alone and desperate, I helped him. I saved him from people who wanted to hurt him. I gave him food, shelter, and hope when no one else would. I believed in him when no one else did. A murmur ran through the hall. Some guests shook their heads, trying to understand. A few looked at Grace with a new respect, realizing that the woman they had judged harshly had a story no one knew. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud. What are you saying? That you saved him? You expect us to believe this? Grace's gaze met hers, calm and unwavering. Yes. You may think I'm nothing, but I was there when Daniel had nothing. And I was the one who reminded him of his worth when the world had forgotten him. Daniel stood slowly, his presence commanding the room. His eyes, dark and serious, scanned the crowd before settling on Vanessa. It's true, he said simply. Grace saved me. She helped me when I had nothing, when everyone else, including you, Vanessa, turned away. Vanessa's face twisted in disbelief. Her hands shook, her breath quickened. You can't be serious. She's just a woman from the streets. Daniel shook his head, his voice calm but full of authority. She's more than that. She's the reason I'm here today. If it weren't for her, I would not have had the strength to face the world, to become who I am. The hall was silent again. Even the most skeptical guests could not argue with the weight in Daniel's words. Some of them had seen the way he treated Grace earlier, his calm protection, his subtle gestures, and now it made sense. There was a deep bond here, one built not on wealth or status, but on trust, loyalty, and history. Grace took a step forward. Her voice grew stronger. I am not here to hurt anyone, and I am not here to compete with anyone. I am here because I am part of Daniel's life, part of his journey. And tonight is not just about wealth, or weddings, or appearances. It is about remembering what matters. Loyalty, courage, kindness. Whispers ran through the room again. Some guests were shocked, some impressed. Vanessa's lips trembled. Her perfect wedding had been turned into a stage for a story she could never have imagined. She had thought she was in control, but the truth had a power far beyond her plans. Daniel reached out subtly, touching Grace's hand for reassurance. She nodded once. It was time to end the mystery, time to show everyone the truth. Grace's eyes scanned the room, her voice steady. I may have been homeless. I may have walked the streets, faced hunger, cold nights, and loneliness. But I never gave up on Daniel. And he never gave up on me. That is why I am here. Not to shame anyone, not to embarrass anyone, but to remind everyone that true value is not measured by money, or clothes, or titles. It is measured by heart. A silence followed her words. The whispers stopped. Every guest felt the weight of what she had said. Some bowed their heads slightly in respect. Others stared, wide-eyed, realizing they had misjudged her. Vanessa's hands loosened on her bouquet, her anger giving way to confusion. Grace returned to her seat slowly, holding her head high. She had said enough for now. The room had seen her courage, her dignity, and her truth. And the effect was undeniable. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly. A silent understanding passed between them. They had shared a past that no one else could claim, and now the world had finally witnessed it. Vanessa stood frozen at the altar, her perfect day crumbling in front of her. Her victory, her pride, and her carefully crafted plans had been overshadowed by a woman she had considered powerless. But Grace's strength was quiet, unshakable, and impossible to ignore. The guests began to murmur softly, this time not in mockery, but in awe. A new respect had formed in the hall, and everyone realized that the night was no longer about appearances, it was about truth. And the truth had finally been revealed. The wedding hall felt different now. The golden lights still glowed, but the air was thick with tension. Guests no longer whispered idle gossip, they were holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Grace had revealed her secret. Daniel had confirmed it. And Vanessa. Vanessa was slowly realizing that the day she had planned to be perfect was slipping completely from her control. Vanessa's hands trembled as she gripped her bouquet. Her mind raced. How could Daniel bring this woman, someone she had mocked, someone she had believed to be beneath everyone, into the heart of her wedding? How could he openly defend her in front of all these people? Her perfect plan of showing Daniel she had won over him had turned into a nightmare. She stepped forward, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Daniel and Grace. Her voice, sharp and trembling with anger, cut through the silence. "Daniel, how could you?" she shouted. "How could you let her, someone from the streets, stand here in front of everyone and make me look small?" The guests stiffened. The words hung in the air like a storm about to break. All eyes were on Daniel now. His calm expression remained, but his jaw tightened. He had waited for this moment, the final confrontation, and now it was here. "She doesn't make you look small," Daniel said evenly. "You've never understood what matters. You care about appearances, about wealth, about status. But tonight is about truth, and Grace represents that truth. Something you've never had." Vanessa's face turned red. She opened her mouth, wanting to yell, to insult, to humiliate Grace, but Daniel's words cut her off, like a shield protecting Grace. Grace rose slowly from her chair. Her gaze was calm, steady, unshakable. She did not look angry. She did not shout. But her presence alone silenced the room. "I am not here to compete with anyone," Grace said, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't come to ruin anyone. I didn't come to take revenge. I only came to be here, because I was part of Daniel's life when no one else was." Daniel stepped closer to her, his presence protective but proud. "Grace saved me when I had nothing," he said. "When Vanessa left, when everyone else turned away, she stood by me. She believed in me when no one else did. And tonight, she deserves to be here. Not because of who she was, but because of who she is." Vanessa's hands shook. She clutched her bouquet as if it were a lifeline. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling before her eyes. Guests whispered, some leaning toward each other in shock, others watching in stunned silence. The Golden Hall, meant to celebrate her triumph, had become a stage for a story she could not control. You're making a fool of me," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "This was supposed to be my day. And you, both of you, are ruining it." Daniel's eyes softened slightly, but his voice stayed firm. "No, Vanessa. You've ruined it yourself. Your day was never about love or celebration. It was about pride, about showing the world that you won. But real victory, the kind that matters, it comes from courage, loyalty, and truth. Something you will never understand." The hall went completely silent. The guests were frozen, some holding their breath, some staring at Vanessa in disbelief. They could not remember ever seeing a bride so furious, so humiliated, yet so restrained by the presence of others. Grace finally took a step forward, leaving her chair. She did not raise her voice, she did not point fingers. She simply looked at Vanessa with calm eyes. "I have nothing against you," she said. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone. But you cannot control everything. You cannot rewrite the past. You cannot take what isn't yours." Vanessa's face went white. Her lips quivered, and for a moment, she seemed to shrink under Grace's quiet strength. The guests noticed it too, a shift in power. Vanessa, the once confident and perfect bride, was losing. And Grace, the woman from the streets, had quietly claimed the attention and respect of everyone in the room. Daniel reached out, taking Grace's hand gently. The gesture was subtle, but it said everything. He stood beside her, proud, unwavering. The guests could feel it. They could feel the bond, the loyalty, and the history between them. Vanessa turned abruptly, trying to escape the eyes of the hall, but she could not. Every guest had seen her humiliation, every whispered conversation confirmed her loss of control. Her dream wedding had become a lesson she would never forget. Grace lowered her gaze, but there was a calm fire in her eyes. She had survived streets, hunger, cold nights, and endless judgment. She had faced the impossible before. And tonight, she had proven that dignity and courage were stronger than wealth and pride. The whispers slowly began to change. They were no longer about mockery or gossip. Some guests nodded in respect, some looked at Daniel with newfound admiration. And everyone realized that something extraordinary had happened. Vanessa stood frozen, clutching the bouquet. Her anger boiled, but there was nothing left to do. She had lost control, lost her plan, and most importantly, lost the illusion that she could dictate the story of the night. Grace returned to her seat, her head held high. Daniel's hand remained gently on hers, a quiet promise of loyalty and trust. The hall had witnessed the breaking point. The moment when the old power of wealth and pride collided with the quiet strength of truth and loyalty. And everyone knew, the night was far from over. The wedding hall was quiet now. The golden lights reflected off crystal chandeliers, but the atmosphere was no longer festive. Every guest was on edge, staring at Grace and Daniel, sensing that the night had shifted in a way they would never forget. Vanessa stood at the altar, frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The perfect wedding she had planned for months had turned into chaos, and she could see it, but could not control it. Grace rose from her seat slowly. Her movements were calm, almost regal. She did not shout, she did not point fingers, she did not seek revenge. She simply stood in the center of the hall, the focus of every eye, her gaze steady, her presence commanding. The room held its breath. Every whisper had stopped. Even the musicians paused, unsure if they should play. The air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Grace looked at Daniel, who stood beside her, calm and confident. Then she turned her gaze toward Vanessa. She did not look angry. She did not smile triumphantly. She looked at peace. "I am not here to humiliate anyone," Grace said softly, her voice carrying across the hall. "I am not here to shame anyone. I did not come here to take revenge. I am here because I belong in Daniel's story, just as he belongs in mine." Vanessa's hands shook. Her bouquet trembled in her grip. She could barely speak. "Belong? You, how?" Her voice broke, swallowed by shock. Grace raised a hand gently, signaling that there was more. "You may have thought tonight was about pride and appearances. But tonight is about truth. I helped Daniel when no one else did. I believed in him when everyone else turned away. And I stand here not to prove myself to anyone, but because loyalty, courage, and kindness cannot be measured by wealth or status." The guests gasped. Some whispered softly in awe. Some stared in stunned silence. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her perfect world crumbling further with every word. Grace paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then she did something no one expected. She smiled, not a wide, triumphant smile, but a calm, sincere one. She turned toward Vanessa, and with a quiet, graceful voice, said, "Vanessa, I thank you." The hall froze. Every guest looked between the two women, confused, shocked, unsure if they had heard correctly. Vanessa blinked, her mouth slightly open. Grace continued, "If you had not left Daniel when he needed support, he would not have grown into the man he is today. And I would not have been able to be a part of his life. So thank you, for teaching us both the lessons we needed." The silence was deafening. Some guests had tears in their eyes. Others looked at Grace in disbelief, unsure how someone could be both humble and so strong. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her anger faltered, replaced by confusion and something she had never expected, respect. Then Grace did something even more unexpected. She turned to Daniel. Her voice was calm but filled with warmth. "You don't need to prove my worth. I already know it. And I will always stand by you, not because of wealth, or appearances, or status, but because of trust and loyalty." Daniel reached for her hand, holding it gently. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. The crowd could feel the connection between them, strong, unbreakable, unshakable. Vanessa's hands fell to her sides. Her bouquet slipped from her grip and landed softly on the floor. The crowd's eyes were no longer on her. They were on Grace. They were on Daniel. And in that moment, Vanessa realized the truth. She had lost control. She had lost the story she thought she could write. Grace walked slowly toward the exit. Her steps were calm, deliberate. She held her head high. The crowd parted like the sea before her, their eyes following her every movement. No one whispered. No one laughed. They simply watched, speechless, as the woman they had underestimated left the hall with grace, dignity, and quiet power. Daniel followed her, leaving Vanessa standing alone at the altar. The guests gasped again. Cameras clicked, not to capture a wedding, but to capture a moment of real human courage and loyalty. The Golden Hall, once a symbol of pride and wealth, had transformed into a stage for truth, kindness, and respect. As they reached the doors, Grace paused and looked back once. She gave a small, knowing smile, not at Vanessa, not at the crowd, but at the power of doing what is right, no matter the odds. The doors closed behind them. The hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the guests began to whisper, not in gossip, but in admiration. Some were inspired. Some were shocked. And everyone knew that they had witnessed something unforgettable. Vanessa stood frozen, her wedding ruined, her plans destroyed, and her pride shattered. She had learned a hard lesson that night. Real strength, loyalty, and courage are not measured by wealth or appearances, but by heart and character. Outside, Grace and Daniel walked together, hand in hand. The streets awaited, but tonight, it did not matter. They had proven that life is not about appearances, or wealth, or pride. It is about loyalty, courage, and standing up for what is right even when no one expects it. And in the hearts of everyone who had watched, one truth remained clear. Some moves cannot be ignored. Some stories cannot be erased. And some people leave everyone speechless.